great pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, Dr. Nadia Rosenthal. And I have to tell you that Nadia is the only person who's ever paid attention to us when we say, don't use too many slides. So these are her slides this evening. Nadia did her PhD at Harvard Medical School and then did her postdoctoral training at the NIH and then moved back to Harvard Medical School where she ran her own independent laboratory. In 2001, she made a move that many of her colleagues viewed as career suicide. How many times in your career has that been someone criticized you for doing something that was career suicide?
I do it on a regular basis.
Yeah. Nadia and I get along very, very well. One of the many things that we have in common, actually, is committing career suicide, and then being still here to tell you about it. She left the security of Harvard. I'm not sure what security of Harvard is, but she left Harvard to head off in a new path to head a fledgling branch of the European Molecular Biology Laboratory in Rome, Italy. And today, there are more than a dozen years after that, there are multiple branches of EMVL throughout Europe, and they're really a flagship of science in the European Union. She's also now the founding director of the Australian Regenerative Medicine Institute at Monash University in Melbourne. And she and her colleagues there focus on using a variety of animal models, just like the MDI Biological Laboratory does, to really try to understand how regeneration occurs and why it doesn't occur in humans and how we might be able to reverse that process. She holds a number of international awards and participates in several advisory boards. She actually is sort of a native of the island. Her parents actually had a house on Sutton Island. She has two houses. She lives here part of the year, Australia, Europe, other places part of the year. So she's actually on the advisory boards of the Jackson Laboratory, College of the Atlantic, and the MDI Biological Laboratory. She's quite interesting in the sense that her career really started out in the world of art. She was the daughter of two classically trained pianists, and her father, Lawrence Rosenthal, is a well-known Hollywood film composer. So she really started her whole life looking at music, ballet, dancing, art of all kinds. On Sutton Island, she was notorious for drawing just everything she saw. But then at 15, she took an advanced biology course in high school and promptly announced to her parents that she didn't care about arts as being a career. She was going to become a scientist. And she actually now melds both together. So welcome, Nadia.
So thank you very, very much for coming. I don't know why any of you are here. Look at this day. I mean, I also would like to thank the MDI Biolabs for putting on this wonderful series. I think it's a fantastic thing to do, and I'm delighted to be part of it. So I made a very provocative title for my speech, and if you can't hear me in the back, I'm projecting as loud as I can, so just put your hand up and I'll scream. I called the talk Regenerative Medicine and the End of Aging, and I figured that way we'd have a standing room only audience. So I have a couple of sort of icebreakers for you. The first one is a question. Who wants to live forever? Okay, that's really pathetic. Anyway, okay. Four of us want to live forever. Now, by the end of my talk, we're going to change all that. So, who wants to live till 150? So why aren't you raising your hands? I know why you're not raising your hands. You're not raising your hands because you don't want to live in sonergy for the last 50 years of your life, right? So I want to tell you about what's going on in the area of regenerative medicine to try to give us the opportunity to have much longer lives that are productive, that are healthy, and that actually are fun. And so I'm going to start by just giving you a little bit of a background on what regenerative medicine is and why we're interested in doing it in the first place. And I have to say that it is with great joy that I see that the MDI Biolabs is my partner in crime when it comes to looking at the field of regenerative medicine from a very sort of open-minded point of view. And I really feel like I met my soulmate when I met Kevin and realized that we were kind of running parallel institutes about a half a world away. So the problem we have is that for the last about 150 years, Western medicine has made some extraordinary advances. Surgery is beyond belief complicated and wonderful, and it can do incredible things. We have an extraordinary number of tools in our box. We have things like antibiotics now, and we have a number of drugs against cancer that are rather effective. And we have drugs we can take for heart disease that keep our hearts in good shape. But we're still plagued with age-related degeneration, and injury is a big problem, as you know, as you get older. And so really what we've been looking at in Western medicine is pharmaceuticals. We have a lot of drugs that we can take, corrective surgery, which is often astounding but can only do so much, organ transplants for people with, for instance, terminal heart failure. But as we know, that is a limitation based on the fact that there aren't that many organs to go around, unless, of course, you're in Maine and people ride motorcycles without helmets. Very helpful. So, and then, of course, there are the degenerative diseases, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, you name it. And those are very, very difficult to treat with any of those three sort of advances of Western medicine that I mentioned. So we really need a kind of an innovative therapy, a new way of thinking about medicine that restores health by preventing these degenerative diseases, that allows us to repair organs, not just replace them, and also to find ways to get our own body to regenerate in the same way that we could do when we were kids. Remember when you had a broken arm as a child, it healed like nobody's business. Your grandchildren cut their skin and it heals almost immediately. That sort of youthful regenerative capacity is something that regenerative medicine would like to understand and prolong. So we want to repair, we want to replace when we can, and we want to restore. And these are things that we want to do against damage that is caused by injury or by aging or by a particular degenerative disease that tends to sap your strength and ruin your life. So I would like to sort of give you just a few pictures to get this idea across. And they should be bigger, so I'll walk down the aisles with them so you can see them. Okay, so here's the problem that we're dealing with. Chronic diseases, they increase with age. So that one, the top one, is cardiovascular. This is age in years. That's 95 at the end. You see, I already assumed you guys were going to want to live to 150. So, and then this is cancer there, and that's Alzheimer's, and that's infectious diseases, as you can see by influence. Cancer levels out. Cancer levels out. But cardiovascular does not. Okay? So that's the problem we have right there. And that's with all the drugs and all the corrective surgery and everything we've got right now. So this is the way I think about the problem. It's really simple. As we get older, we get wiser. So that's birth and that's death. So that at the end, we're really, really wise. Unless, of course, we're in Sonergy. On the other hand, we have the problem, which is that our capacity, which is very small at birth because we're helpless, gets to its peak sometime in the first third of life, and then peters out altogether. And the annoying thing is it's petering out just when we're the wisest. So that's a bad deal. Okay. Now, there's another problem. The other problem is, with that comes the red stuff, and that's increasing medical cost. Okay, so we all know the story, which is we're all going to cost our children and our grandchildren more in the last year of life than we cost them for the rest of our lives. And this, of course, is a real problem because a lot of us are getting to the point where we're into this range, and the baby boomers are hitting this area where the medical burden on our economy is going to be astounding. So the real problem is this area that I've put in little dotted lines, okay? So that's the part we want to focus on. That's where we're really smart, but we're losing our capacity, okay? So here's the idea behind regenerative medicine. And I mean, you know, to some extent this is still a fantasy. But on the other hand, why not fantasize? And the idea behind regenerative medicine is to push that curve well and truly out. And remember, see here, I've not changed the time of death. And the reason that I've not changed the time of death is because I knew none of you would want to live to 150. I've done this before. But what you want to do is you want to be playing golf right here, and then you want to be dead in your sleep right here. And that's why we want to fix it up. And the good news is that would cost a lot less money. So that's that little medical cost now. And look what it does to the good part of your life, that part where you're really smart and your capacity is still bigger. So we call that the health span. We want to extend the health span of the population rather than just extend the lifespan, which is interesting to none of you, as we determined. Okay. So how are we going to do that? Well, there are 3 interventions that we can consider that we know might work. And this is work from animal studies, from epidemiological studies of human populations, and from an increasing awareness of the fact that environmental stress, which we want to reduce, that says intervention 1, reduce environmental stress. The environmental stress would be toxins, public health, lifestyle. The wine is fine, don't worry. It's very good for you. Keep drinking that. But other things that you can do that will absolutely stress your body. And the problem with any intervention in any of these sort of environmental stresses is that you have to start so early and you have to continue for so long that it's very unlikely it'll work for very many of the population, because at this point you're 35 and you don't even believe this. You don't believe this word at all, death. So it's unlikely you're going to do anything really preventative at this point in your life. And also, of course, it's hard to avoid stress. Let's face it, unless, of course, you're on the Astakouin Terrace on a day like today. Okay, number 2. Here's another one. Intervention number 2 is you change your metabolism. Now notice, you have to do this early. And unfortunately, this involves caloric restriction. You've heard the stories about how people who eat a lot less they live a lot longer. They wish they weren't living a lot longer, but they do live a lot longer. I don't know any one of these caloric restricted individuals is any happier than any of us, I can tell you. So I'd say shorter but happier, and I think most people would agree. However, there are statistics from animals that reducing the actual intake of calories can prolong your lifespan. But we're really more interested in that health span. And so the real way to do this is with regenerative medicine. Now, regenerative medicine, and we're going to talk for the rest of the time about that, involves intervention at any point along this curve. So if you get the idea that you actually do want to live a little better or a little longer, and you're my age in your 60s, you can still do something about it. If you're in your 80s, you can still do something about it. Because it turns out that once we understand how the programs that keep us from being vibrant and healthy at the end of our lives, once we understand what those programs are, we can change them at any point. At least this is the vision that we have. Of course, there's a limit to this, but in theory, this allows us to intervene at a time when there's hope for the likes of us, and not just for our children and grandchildren. Okay, so that's the end of my slides. So now you're going to have to just listen to me talk. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you about some of the work that we as regenerative biologists do to try to unravel this mystery. Why is it that when we get old, we get less good at healing? It doesn't really make any sense. If you think of a tree, the sequoias in the forests of California are thousands of years old, and they can heal just as well as they could when they were saplings. Carp live for a very long time, and fish are good at healing much longer than we are. So there's no real imperative, biological imperative, that says that we couldn't be good at healing. It's just we aren't. And we want to know what that difference is between us and these organisms that can do such a good job. So I'll give you a couple of examples. We like to think of regeneration, therefore, as what we call an evolutionary variable. What that means is that at different stages in the evolution of organisms on this earth, there was a shift to our situation, which is that we're very smart, but we can't figure out how to regenerate. But I can tell you that little flatworm called planaria, if you cut them up into 1,000 pieces, each of those 1,000 pieces can become a new and perfectly reasonable planarian. So they clone themselves 1,000 times by cutting themselves up. And this is theoretically because each part of that planarian not only has the full information about how to make a new organism, but it also is actually just stuffed full of stem cells. And we've all heard about stem cells. So what is a stem cell? A stem cell is a cell in your body that's quite special in the sense that it can go ahead and divide and make more of itself, or it can decide to make one of its daughters into something special, like a liver or a brain, and the other one continues to be that stem cell. So you can see how the lineage can continue on while at the same time you're sloughing off all these cells that can become other things. And what I've just described to you is the development of an organism. You start from a single fertilized egg, that's the ultimate stem cell. You start to divide, and every time you divide, there are cells that are put aside that never become any specific thing, but remain in your body as these sort of potent cells that can make other things along the way. Now, at the very beginning, your stem cells can, in your embryonic stage, can make every part of you. In fact, you can take an 8-cell human embryo, and each one of those cells could become another person. But the minute you go one more division to 16, that's lost. So somewhere along the line, the decision not to be what we call totipotent comes into play, and the cells start to make decisions about not being, everything to everybody and being very good at one thing, like being a liver cell. So when we get to an adult human being, we have stem cells in our body. We couldn't live without them. They're in our skin so that we can renew our skin all the time. They're in our blood so that we can make new blood all the time. And they're in the linings of our intestines that get sloughed off with the food we eat, and you can make new every time. So actually we turn over, with some exceptions, what people say every 7 to 10 years, you're a whole new person because you've actually died, your cells have died, and you've replaced them. And one of the ways you do that is by calling on these pools of cells. So those little flatworms seem to have a trick, which is just so many of these little cells in them, but they are at the very early stage, so they can become everything. Well, we're a little more complicated than flatworms, so probably flatworms aren't going to be the be-all and end-all answer to our dreams. So let's move a little further down the evolutionary tree towards more complex organisms, something more like us with a backbone. We can talk about fish. So over at the MDI Biolabs, there's some fantastic work going on looking at regeneration in zebrafish. I'm sure if you've been around the MDI Biolabs, you've heard Woot speak, and it's a wonderful story. And the extraordinary thing about these animals is that they can regenerate anything, even their hearts, which we're terrible at regenerating. And why is that? Well, we think one of the reasons is not necessarily because they have more stem cells, but it's because the cells in their body can go backwards. So remember how I said something goes and becomes a liver cell? Well, supposing that cell could say, I'm going to stop being a liver cell, and I'm just going to go back and go into mass production and make more of myself. I'll make all liver. I won't go off and make something like brain in the middle of my liver, but I'll make a lot more of them. And we think that's what the brakes go off in a zebrafish when it's hurt, and it can just basically make more of the same thing that it already had. So that's another way you can regenerate. So the first way is you can use stem cells to regenerate. The second way is you can call on your cells that have already decided to do something and ask them to go back and make more of themselves. And so that's a very compelling model, because these are animals that have brains and hearts and eyes and ears and pancreases, and you know, the people who work on fish say they even have personality. So we're basically looking at something almost like a human, but on the other hand, it doesn't have arms and legs. So I work on an animal that has arms and legs. It's a little closer, I think, to us, and salamanders. And so there are a number of different kinds of salamanders, but all of them share a very remarkable capacity. I'm sure you've heard or seen these stories about salamanders losing their tails or losing their arms and growing them back over and over again. And in fact, we do this sadistically to our salamanders, and they don't seem to mind. And in that case, you're looking at a very similar arm to ours. It has skin, it has nerves, it has bones, it has muscle, and fingernails even. And you can grow it back, and it even has the same speckles on its skin that it did the first time. So the program is so robust that it seems to be able to replay itself over and over again. So why can't we do this? Because we're terrible. I mean, you know, if an arm is cut off, that's the end of it. You know, finger is lost, we can't grow it back. And if we have a heart attack and our heart is damaged, it never grows back, and as a result, our heart gets weaker and weaker, and you end up with a heart failure. So very recently, a new revelation hit the regenerative medicine scene. And the revelation came from some early work that had been done back in the 60s that people have forgotten about, and it was rediscovered and worked up again, and sure enough, it was true. It turns out that when a mouse is born, it can regenerate its heart, just like a fish or a salamander. 7 days after that mouse has been born, it loses the capacity. And I have to explain, mice can't regenerate their hearts just the same as we can't. I mean, mice and we're very similar, believe it or not. And so the fact that these mice could do it brought back all sorts of anecdotal stories about how embryos got injured in the uterus and were somehow regenerated. And it, of course, sort of makes sense if you're thinking about a kid, you know, and how well the kids heal. And so it became clear to us that we don't have to listen to the critics telling us that, well, you work on salamanders, and salamanders are different from humans, so it's just not relevant. Well, guess what it is? Because it turns out that we go through a period in our life where we're sort of like a salamander. So what that means is that we have all the genetic makeup, we have all the information in our bodies that know how to regenerate, but we lose it after we get born. So why do we lose it? So here are some theories. One theory is, well, you know, if we kept that fabulous regenerative capacity, we might start multiplying our cells like those little zebrafish do and get cancer. So maybe we can't regenerate because we're trying to protect our bodies against cancer. That might have some, there might be something in that. But the only problem I have with that argument is that salamanders live for up to 30 years. And they don't get any more cancer than we do. So maybe you have to wait until you're 80 to be to the point where being a regenerative organism would give you the a disadvantage of increased cancer risk. But there's something that just doesn't quite fit. And you know, we could argue that all night. Another possibility is that, well, we live for a long time. We live so long that we end up, you know, not having enough stem cells in our body to do this. Well, the fact of the matter is that that doesn't fit either, because we lose the regenerative capacity we had as newborns very rapidly. Look at the mouse. 7 days later, it can't regenerate anymore. And that's not a long life. That's a very short life. So that doesn't make that much sense either. So one possibility is that we just are losers. I mean, and if we're just losers, that's actually a very, very encouraging and positive statement, because it means that there's no reason in hell why we shouldn't be able to regenerate as we get older. We just lost the capacity for no good reason whatsoever, and it was a flip of nature that made mammals unable to regenerate anymore. And if we could just unlock that key and figure out what it is that we as very, very young organisms can do, what the fish can do, and what the salamanders can do, we may be at a point where we could actually change the game. Okay, how am I doing for time? Okay. I want to stop for a minute and ask if there are any burning questions, because I was sort of going off in a slightly different direction now. Yes?
Is the ability to regenerate like that, how within a salamander?
Yes.
Does that change as they get old?
Yes. So the question is, do older salamanders lose their capacity to regenerate? And the answer is no. There is a slight decrement in the capacity for a fish to regenerate as it gets very old. And some newts are a little bit more susceptible, but the salamanders that I work on, which are called axolotls, they're these incredible Mexican walking fish. You've probably seen pictures of them. They have these wild gills that stick out to the side, and they actually are aquatic. They can live for, as I said, 30 years, and they're just as good at regenerating. In fact, we have a 14-year-old geezer in our collection, and we cut his legs off regularly just to check. Don't worry, because they actually eat each other's legs off regularly. If they're stressed or crowded or hungry, sort of like academics. Yeah.
What about learning from animals that age very rapidly? Like I'm thinking of a salmon once it lays its
Yes, yes.
They
Yeah.
practically die off in months.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. So some animals have a programmed cell death, as it were. Like salmon, after they spawn, they literally just degenerate and fall and die. I mean, you know, their bodies essentially just shut down. And I think that there are also some horrible human diseases called progeria, where children get prematurely old. And they get all the old age diseases that we saw on that first chart. They get cardiovascular, they get Alzheimer's. And by the time they're 20, they're essentially they're the equivalent of a 100-year-old unhealthy person. And there are some extraordinary insights coming from those very unusual cases about potential aging mechanisms. However, unfortunately, for a normal person who doesn't have, let's say, a mutation in this particular lamin gene that causes this horrible disease, it looks like it is much more a question of a sort of a stochastic decrement, just a little, you know, doing it a little bit worse, a little, you know, your knees start giving out. You know, I'm walking on the rocks out in Sutton's Island, complaining to my husband this morning that I feel like I've just lost 10 years of my life, you know, just can't seem to crawl around like a goat anymore. I'd want to be a goat, you know, and I realize I'm not really a goat anymore. So I think the problem is that it's such a complicated business, aging. And of course, evolution doesn't really care that much about aging, because once you've stopped procreating, the hard-line Darwinists say evolution isn't going to care about you anymore. So there's not going to be any selection for or against your aging better or worse, because as long as you've made your kids, as far as your job on the earth is, from an evolutionary point of view, gone. Now, I think that's ridiculous, because, yeah, you need grandparents. And also, what about, I would just like to ask, you know, those of you in the audience who feel that I had a point here. I mean, there goes my wine. What about that experience? What is about the blue stuff? What did I do with that? All my nice slides. Ah, here we go. What about this? I mean, what about this? You know? I mean, the experience that we get. And there must be a feedback onto our social fabric that has some potential for some kind of a selection. But like I said, I have a lot of arguments with the hardliners. They don't like that idea. There was one other question, then I'll just go on. I think, no. Oh, yes?
Why do the salamanders die? They can still regenerate.
Why do they ever die? Why do salamanders ever die? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. If they can keep regenerating as good as they were.
They can. Well, they can get diseases. You know, they can get an infection, let's say, just like anyone can get an infection. And so they'll die of reasons, you know, traumatic injury. Maybe their neighbor eats a little too much of them. You know, doesn't stop at the shoulder, keeps going. So it's more, yeah, it's more like that.
Lobsters also are like that.
Yes,
right?
lobsters
They can
are.
regenerate anything?
Yes, they are. I should have mentioned lobsters. Why didn't I mention lobsters?
Because I'm a tour guide and I say that about lobsters. And
It's
they
true.
always say, well, how do they die?
Ah, well, many of them die. They die with lemon slices, you know. But yeah, they are susceptible to the same vagaries of the natural world, which is red in tooth and claw, and it's hard to stay alive for a long time. And so what we're talking about is the natural limitation of lifespan rather than the actuality. I mean, you can get run over by a truck, you can get, you know, dropped off the edge of a, you know, that's why they die. Yes?
The regeneration in salamanders, is it just limbs, or are they able to regenerate other organs in their
Yeah,
body?
so how much of a salamander can regenerate? The regeneration is remarkable. They can regenerate their entire lower jaw if they lose it in a fight or someone eats it off. They can regenerate their heart. So you can go in and cut off a big chunk of their heart and it regenerates. They can regenerate their entire tail. You can cut off their tail, and that includes a spinal column and nerves and all the muscles. It's magic. We are, you know, if we can solve this, we will end Paralympics. You realize that? Be amazing. Yeah, one more. Yeah.
It's my understanding that the liver in the human regenerates.
Yes.
You take a lobe out, but
Yes.
you haven't mentioned that yet.
Oh, well, I did very in passing, and I should have
Yeah,
made more
right,
of a
right.
stink about it. Livers can regenerate. Thank
Only organs
God,
in humans.
because otherwise we couldn't drink as much as we do.
That's the purpose. Red wine.
And people studying liver regeneration are getting some very interesting insights. However, I should say that liver has some very specialized cells in it that appear to be quite different from the regenerative scenarios in other parts of your body, such as your skin and your blood. But it is very remarkable that our livers can regenerate. Now, we're pretty good at regenerating. I mean, it's amazing. We're all almost here. We're all more or less over 50. And, you know, there's nothing that we could have just ended up as cauliflowers. I mean, you know, you turn over and you turn over and you turn over. Maybe the shape would have changed. It's amazing. We all look, I mean, I recognized Anne in 5 seconds. She doesn't look a day over when I was a little kid at the Harbor Club. And that's because her genes are just, you know, recreating that face that I recognize every single time that her skin turns over. It's still Anne. And so we should not underestimate our capacity to maintain ourselves. But the problem is that decline and then those diseases, and that's the problem we have. Because I actually do want to live to 150. Okay, so let me just finish off here, and then we can chat some more. So one thing that is very clear, and this gets back to this liver issue, is that different organs regenerate in different ways or are maintained in different ways. So for instance, our skin is very good at regenerating, but our hearts are not. Our liver is good, but our brains are not as good. And so one of the interesting questions then is, what is different about the regenerating cells in those organs? So is the liver stem cell the same as a brain stem cell? And this is a very important issue given the amount of publicity that stem cell therapy is getting these days. So I thought I'd just say a few words about stem cell therapy. And now that you're all good regeneration biologists, I think you'll be able to grasp more acutely the problem that the stem cell therapy field is encountering. So the way stem cell therapy works, in theory, if it does, is you take out some cells from somebody's body and you call them stem cells. Now, sometimes they're stem cells. So, for instance, if you take out the blood or the bone marrow of a person, those cells are spectacularly good at making new blood. And so for people who have blood disease, a transplant of blood can be a completely regenerative event. And that's because those cells are very good at doing what they do, and because we understand how to put back the cells, it's easy. It's the blood. You can get to the blood. It's in your veins. You can add more blood to your body. It's much harder to try to introduce cells into, let's say, your heart or your brain or any other part of your body that's falling apart, like your knees. And the reason for that is because, A, these places are harder to get to physically, and B, once the cells get there, unless they are already knee stem cells or brain stem cells, they won't know what to do because they'll be totally out of context. So it's like dropping someone down in the middle of the Mojave Desert. I mean, they'll just sort of go, what am I doing here and why? Why should I do anything? Why should I make new knee for you when I actually used to be in your fat pad or wherever they're taking the cell? So the problem is that we don't understand enough about the peculiarities of each organ and how they regenerate to understand how to replace the cells that we think will help to rejuvenate that organ. Then there's another problem. In the case of a blood transfusion, the stem cell knows what to do. It knows to make more blood. But in the case of, for instance, the heart, we don't have a lot of stem cells in our heart. In fact, there's an argument we don't have any stem cells in our heart. So you take cells from some other place, like the blood, and you stick them in the heart and you hope for the best. But the fact of the matter is that in that case, you haven't given the cells any information about what they should become, so they're not actually going to do much at all. And they are certainly not going to become heart cells. That is obvious. So the new idea is, well, you put the cells in and they'll squirt out things that'll help. So they'll be sort of like biological pumps. They'll make goodies for the area, and that'll be helpful to that ailing tissue. And there's some data out there that suggests that that might be a way in which these cells can help. But the truth of the matter is that with this very great exception of the blood, which has an extraordinarily long stem cell therapeutic success rate, the rest of the stem cell field is really rather still in the dark, I would say. I'm a bit of a skeptic, and I'm also horrified at what's going on in the stem cell tourism trade, where people are flying to Thailand or Germany and having stem cells injected into themselves, and it's at the very worst, or at the very best, it's harmless, and at the very worst, it could actually be very, very bad. And we've just had our first stem cell death, and it's not a great way to go. Unless you know what the scientific basis of what you're doing is, medicine can really do more harm than good. So there's another fact. Your stem cells do change as you get older. So that may have something to do with why we can't regenerate as well as we get older. And it's thought that they lose their oomph. And so there's been some interesting work in mice in which stem cells from an old mouse have been put into a young mouse. And in the environment of a young mouse, they're much better off. But this is bad for those of us here who might consider stem cell. Yeah, the reverse is not great. If you take old cells and you put it into a young person, they actually do, it's not good for the young person. So it's not clear, unless we've saved our cord blood or something like that, how we're going to actually solve that problem as well. We're going to have to figure out how to rejuvenate our stem cells. I guess what I'm trying to tell you is I have no idea how this is going to work. But the easy stem cell theory, which is all we need is some stem cells and that'll get us where we need to go and give us rejuvenation, is clearly not that simple. So that's my caveat emptor. Okay. Now, I thought maybe I'd just end with one idea that I have personally about how this might work. And again, this is sort of unproven, but I was very excited because last night I got online, and I can tell you that is a heroic effort out on Sutton Island, because you have to sit on the cliff hoping to get red zone. You hold your computer up like this and you go like this and you pray, and meanwhile you get eaten by mosquitoes. But I got online, I discovered a paper of mine was accepted for publication. I'll tell you all about it because I think it's actually a potentially interesting area that we might get some information through. So what we've been working on in my lab is the idea that the reason you can't regenerate after an injury or a degenerative disease isn't because your body doesn't know how to do it. It's because it can't do it. And the reason it can't do it is because you're building up scar tissue. And when you think about it, if you get hurt, what do you do? I mean, if someone's arm is chopped off, it heals. But there's a great big lump of scar tissue where it healed. It has to be there because otherwise you'd bleed to death. But that is a very, very preventative kind of tissue. It's kind of it's gristly. It's hard. It's not easy. It's sort of, you know, it's like gristle on a steak. It's not great stuff. It's not easy to imagine how you're going to grow an arm out. So we wondered whether scarring itself was an impediment, and so we went to the salamander and asked, does the salamander scar? And the answer is never. So when the salamander has an arm chopped off, it just heals back over again, and then this little sort of blub of cells starts up at the stump that's healed over, and just, it's sort of magic. It's sort of like something out of a science fiction movie. You see these little fingers start to grow, and it just sort of comes out, and it doesn't seem to ever scar. So there's never a big scar. It just seems to just do this without scarring. It closes over so it doesn't bleed, but then it never scars. So we said, well, I wonder if there's a way we could make a salamander scar and see if we could increase the scarring in a salamander. Could we turn a salamander into a Paralympic champion? So we started fiddling around with those components of the inflammatory response that we know are very, very active when you get an injury. And we took away some of those inflammatory cells that we know are very important in terms of their capacity to orchestrate an effective healing and then regeneration event. Because it's a fantastic deal. It's like a wedding for 350 people. It's complicated, and so we took out one caterer, as it were, and the whole thing just went dead in its tracks. The arm got cut off, the scar started up, the arm never grew back. Salamander's walking around on 3 legs saying, what? Nah. I mean, it's never seen this before. It usually grows it right back. It's no problem. And the animal never grew its arm back ever, even though we only took away the cells that were important, these immune cells that were important for about 5 days. But it was the time we took them away. So if we took the immune cells away 5 days after we cut off the guy's arm, the arm grew back. So something about that very early stage when you get injured, at least in a traumatic injury, seems to be very important. And it really started focusing our thoughts on the immune system. So the immune system is an area that I have never dared to go because as a biologist, it's the equivalent of really, really complex stamp collecting. You've got to know a lot, and you've got to know all the names of all the different stamps. And I found the whole thing exceedingly boring, and I stayed away from it for 60-some years, and now I have been learning immunology. And the reason I've been learning immunology is because it seems that the way our immune system responds to injury when we are a day-old mouse versus the way it responds to injury when we are a year-old mouse or a 10-year-old human or an 80-year-old human changes. So as everything, our immune system ages. And our immune system is obviously all those white blood cells that float around in your blood and do things like surveillance against infection, cleaning up the problem if there's an inappropriate death or an injury. It also controls the way in which we recognize foreign objects as non-self versus self. And when it goes wrong, you end up with autoimmune disease. So what we've begun to figure out is that the relationship between our capacity to tolerate our own body and know when something foreign is in it, and our capacity to be able to allow ourselves to regenerate is tightly linked in a way that was totally counterintuitive to me. So now what we have to do is we have to ask the question, if our immune system is so different from a salamander, what do they do that's so different? And it turns out what they do is within literally a couple of hours after you cut off the limb of a salamander, the whole immune system is on the case. So normally, if you cut yourself, one set of cells comes in, then 2 days later another set of cells comes in, then 3 days later another set of cells comes in. This is like a SWAT team. And they're all there, and they seem to be organizing this thing like a complete army, and they get the whole regeneration act together, and they start growing out this limb without any scarring at all. And if you just perturb any one of those SWAT team members, the whole thing just stops in its tracks. So what does that mean? I guess it means that we now have to look at whether our immune systems can be tweaked. So we're now asking the question, can we make a mouse's immune system so strong that as it gets older, it's able to regenerate without scarring? So that's where we're at now, and that's what we're looking at, and hopefully we'll be able to tell you something in another Science Cafe. Yes?
In that salamander where you cut the arm off and tinkered with the immune system so it wouldn't go back, in time, when the immune system would recover, if you cut it again, would it come back?
Do you need a job in my lab? So I will. This guy just described the experiment that my postdoc thought of. So, I mean, and this guy just had about half an hour of training, so this guy's a very smart guy. So what James, my postdoc, who did the experiment of taking out the immune system cell that he thought was going to, hopefully, I'm sorry if I'm getting you in the wrong. If he took out this immune system cell, he found that even if he waited for a very long time, the salamander couldn't grow back its limb. So what this gentleman suggested is wait until the salamander's immune system is recovered and then chop off a little bit of the limb again and see what happens. It grows right back.
Does it?
Yeah, it grows right back. So as long as the immune system is intact, even if it was a stump, it restarts the engine and just grows right back. So this is yeah, just right through the scar tissue. Figures out how to do it. I mean, if that isn't an encouraging result, yeah. So the key is pretty much the immune system. Well, it's just, I mean, I'm unfortunately, this is a very biased viewpoint. So I've now got, 100 people who believe in this. It's okay. Now, in the last 5 minutes, oh yes, sure.
That's a huge problem.
Right. I could talk an hour on that, and the question was, if you strengthen up your immune system, it might end up attacking your own body, and you could get an autoimmune disease. And the answer to your question, without going into a whole lot of detail, is that the immune system is this beautifully balanced system in which you have some cells that are out there to be the sort of frontline aggressive attacker cells. Oops, bacteria, we need to kill this. Cancer cell, let's get rid of it. And then there's an equally strong group of cells that are there to keep the frontline guys from going hog wild. And it's that balance of effector and what we call sort of helper or regulatory cell that essentially maintains this dynamic equilibrium in your immune system. And if it goes wrong in either direction, you end up sick. So when I talk about boosting the immune system, I'm talking about boosting a very balanced setup. So it would require both sides to be much, much more active. And in fact, it's the tolerant side that's probably the more important side than the big bad guys.
How in the world do you do it?
How do you do what? Yeah, how do I strengthen the immune system?
Yes.
Vitamin C. It's very good for you. No, kidding. I don't know yet. I don't know what it would take, and whether we can shift the immune system in an old mouse to look like a young mouse. But that's what we're trying to do right now, to see what we can do. And there are controls on the immune system that are very well known. And then a lot that are much less well known. And it's a very dynamic field, so it's not at all clear. I mean, I don't have a pill. I don't have a suggestion except being happy is better than being sad. People who are depressed have immune systems that are compromised. So, all of those old wives' tales are probably right in some way. It's very interesting. So anyway, okay, I'm just going to give you a crystal ball. Where are we going to be in 20 years? Because I didn't hear anyone say they didn't want to be alive in 20 years. Right? Okay. Okay, so first of all, we will be able to prevent a lot of the degenerative diseases that plague the aging population because every one of you will have had your DNA sequenced. And that means that we will know exactly what you are susceptible to. And that means that we will be able to do a lot more as physicians. The physicians will be able to be much more proactive in prevention. So I've just had my genome sequenced. Actually, it's in my yellow bag right there. I can show it to you afterwards if you want to see it. It was very interesting. I'll tell you just a little bit about it because it wasn't scary at all. I think it wasn't scary at all because I kind of, don't believe I'm going to live forever, even though I wish I could. And so I knew I'm going to die of something. So I was just interested to know what it might be. And it was, so what happened is that I found that, in fact, I'm quite lucky. I don't have any of the big, scary mutations that people hear about, the one that gives you breast cancer or the ones that give you Alzheimer's. I seem to be okay on all of those, although I'm sure there's some lurking in the background they didn't mention. But the one they came up with was a gene in which there's a mutation in something called the ABCA4 transporter. It doesn't matter. It's a gene that is involved in your keeping your eye healthy, and this mutation in that gene is making me susceptible to macular degeneration as of now, because I just turned 61, and it starts when you 60s to 80s. So I'm probably going to go blind, but I'm probably not going to die of some really horrible disease. And so I've just got to figure out what you can do about macular degeneration. But that means I'm going to go to the optometrist and ask them, what are the preventative? I won't be surprised when, my eyesight starts going, I'll know that it's coming along. And there are interesting cures that are coming along for macular degeneration. And so it just gives you a whole new way of thinking about your health. It's really interesting. A friend of mine said, I didn't need to have my genome sequenced to know that I should be eating less, exercising more, and taking vitamins. But guess what? I'm eating less, exercising more, and taking vitamins now, and I wasn't before. So that's one thing. Now, supposing you find that horrible little mutation, like the one I have, that's going to give me blindness, what can we do about it? In 20 years, I will go, oh, I've got to do a gene correction. So what I'll do is I'll go into the lab. Well, someone like me will go into the lab, and we'll design a little sort of nanoparticle-y thing, which I won't go into, but they exist already. It's just in the last 2 years. It's a fantastic molecular machine that you can direct to a cell, and it will go in, and it will, literally like an eraser, it'll just correct that mistake. Now, can you imagine what that would do for, yes, it'd be great for my eyes, but serious diseases like muscular dystrophy or these horrible, like the progeria disease. You could correct this once you found out about it. You could actually go in and correct it. So genetic diseases would become something that you could actually treat by getting rid of them. Just extraordinary. And then finally, there are going to be, interventions, which we can't even imagine in 20 years. Sort of new medicines that will be directed at completely new targets, like your immune system, that I wouldn't have expected that I would be looking at all. So I think really what I'd like to leave you with then, and then I'll answer your question, is you're going to have 20 more years than you thought. Likely you will, because of the way medicine is going and regenerative medicine is going. What are you going to do with it? And that's, yeah, play golf. So that's the end of my talk, and I'll take some questions. Thank you. You had a question.
How difficult will it be to train the physicians to use these new diagnostic
so
tools and methods?
This very smart man is asking, how smart are the doctors going to be able to use all of this fancy new information in medicine? And the answer is, well, they're not there yet, I can tell you. Medicine is going to become a consumer activity much more than it is now. We go to our doctor, we say, Doc, what's up? Oh, you want me to do this? Oh, I guess, okay, fine, you do it. It's not going to be like that anymore. You're going to go, wait a second, Doc, wait a second. Look, what about, on my iPad here, I've got a C to T transition in my ABCA4 gene. And he goes, what's that? And I go, forget it. Seriously, that's what it's going to be like. It's going to be a question of educating the public so they know what it is that the power that they will have with their own health, managing their own health care in a much more preventative way using this information. And it'll also require a lot more genetic counselors, because not everybody is going to get the good news that I got, which is I might go blind, but otherwise I'm probably okay. A lot of people are going to get some very serious news, and they're not going to know what to do about it. And it can be traumatic, and a lot of people just don't want to know. So there's a whole issue about how you treat the information, especially genomic information, and how you handle this from a privacy point of view, and how the medical establishment is going to interact with the insurance companies so that they don't, cut you off just because you have your C to T transition. So it's not a simple. I was doing crystal ball because I figure in 20 years this will become everybody's. This will be like a blood test, and I think that in that sense, a lot of these problems that we perceive as really tough now will have been worked out along with the realization of the power of the information. In the same way that antibiotics were somewhat suspect when they were first discovered, and now we couldn't live without them. So I'm an optimist, you can tell. Yes?
Where is genome sequencing done?
Where is genome sequencing done? If you want your genome sequenced, you can, there are a couple of companies right now that will do it for you. I had my genome sequenced last January. In November, I signed up for it. I was strong-armed by a colleague. And it cost me $5,000, which I thought was pretty okay. But, what I got annoyed about was by the time I went and got the genome, I read that the company had dropped the price to $1,000. So I would say, hold off for as long as you can. It's like getting a new computer. You want to get the fanciest one. So it's going to I've just been to a talk in which somebody told me, this very well-known scientist who's working in this area, described a situation where a genome will be now, it cost $1 billion to do the first genome, and it took 10 years. Now it costs $1,000, and it takes a couple of weeks, and it'll soon be down to between $10 and $100, and it'll take 15 minutes. Once that happens, it's going to be easy. Right now, it's a little bit complicated. You have to get in touch with a company, and it's a little bit clunky, but it can be done. I can tell you how to do it. Yes.
Where do you do? I mean, how can you get it done?
Oh, you can get in touch with this one. The company I had do it was called Illumina, and you can look it up on the web. But there are other ways in which you can get it. Yeah, you can get it done. Personal sequencing can be done now. Yes.
My doctor, because of Lyme disease, did a DNA test on me.
Yeah.
And so I'm 56, and I found out that I have a mutation around vitamin B.
Right.
So my hair turned gray when I was, in my
But you look great.
40s. So I started taking it 3 months ago.
Yeah.
It's amazing the changes. My hair is coming in so thick and soft, and it was all gray.
Where have you been all my life? I need this woman to come with me every time I give this talk. Fantastic. Fantastic.
It's amazing. Just,
Yeah.
I highly recommend it.
Well, there you go. There was one other one here, and then you. Just, yeah.
A question with a little background. The question, why does gender matter so much? The background, I do research at Columbia University, and I was asked about 28 years ago, when you and I were both a generation younger,
Yeah.
to study centenarians. And I
Yes.
studied 138 people 100 years old.
Yes.
82% of them were women.
Oh, yes.
And the
Why do
difference-
women live longer?
Why do women live longer?
Oh, I don't know. I could give a very flip answer, but I think
We talk about our feelings.
yeah. Thank you. We take vitamin B. It's a very interesting question, and I think there are a number of ways to answer that question. One of which may be that women have a completely different hormonal landscape, and it's thought that our female hormones protect us in ways that males don't have that opportunity. So I think that's a flip answer, though. I think it's much more complicated than that. And not all species have the female living longer. So this is very much of a sort of a human thing, it seems. So, yeah, one more question, which was, I can't remember. Yes?
Right now, if you have your genome test done, is that protected under HIPAA, or is that, or do insurance companies have the right to
I believe, and I'm not sure, so I had it done in Australia, which is where I live when I'm not here. And in Australia, my insurance company, what I did was I had to make sure that all my insurance policies were in good shape. And I know that others who have had their genome sequenced here in the States also were very careful about getting their life insurance policies all set up and their medical insurance policies all set up. And then they had their genome sequenced. And indeed, my genetic counselor said, get everything in order before I call you, because once you know, you are bound by law to tell your insurance companies. And if you don't tell them and they find out you know, they could cancel your insurance policy. So, but this is, I mean, let's not get going about U.S. insurance policy. I mean, it's very important to know. And you will always, if you get your genome sequenced, you will talk to a genetic counselor before. They will not just give you this. They will talk to you about this, and you will get prior counseling about what to do and what not to do with regards to things like insurance. And the life insurance policy is an interesting one because life insurance companies want you to sequence your genome. Why? Because if you find out something in here that'll make you live longer, they'll be richer. So it actually works in their favor. Again. Anyway, I think I'm being told that I have to shut down now. Okay, thank you so much.